Yes. Okay, we're good.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight. This is Indivisible Sacramento, our February meeting. First of all, do we have anyone new here? Anyone who's never been here before? There we go. And then I talked to you earlier, Kat. Do you want to introduce yourself? You don't have to. Don't mean to be put on the spot, but.
No, it doesn't bother me. My name is Kat Carell, and this is my first time here. I've only recently moved to Sacramento. It feels so wonderful to be here. Lived in Reading. Oh, so wonderful to be here. So I'm on the board of the local chapter of the ACLU and the vice chair of outreach for OWL, which is a Democratic Charter group, and with Mighty Oaks, and I've been to Swing Left, and now I'm here.
Reading is a nice town. It has a very cool bridge. It's by Laston too, so
Yes.
Nice place. Sacramento's good. So anyone else new that wants to say hello? I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to. This should be like Cheers, where everybody knows your name. So. If anyone does not know your name, make sure you tell them. So this last weekend, I attended a California Indivisible Leaders Summit in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica actually. It was pretty nice. And it was great. There were a lot of Indivisible leaders from across California, as well as some of the folks from Indivisible's national team, and they really worked on making sure that we have the resources to continue to do good work, all of us around the state, and also worked on putting us in touch with each other so that we can help each other and build something up. I would say the theme of the entire thing, it wasn't spoken, but the recurring theme that I kept hearing in everything they talked about in all the classes we had was bringing people together. They talked about bringing people together in a number of different ways. First, they're really strongly encouraging us to build alliances with other progressive groups, and I think we've already been doing a good job of that. We've worked with Organize, Win, Legislate. We're doing postcards for Sister District. We worked with California Away Team and NorCal Resist and the Sacramento 350, the climate group. So we've got, and there are many other partners that I couldn't list them all. So we're doing a great job at building alliances with other progressive groups, and that's something Indivisible strongly wants to encourage because it helps so many ways. We help them, they help us, but also if we're working on making progress on an issue, it often helps to, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, just piggyback on some of the existing infrastructure that already is there. And that way we don't get in each other's way, and it's just good to work with other groups when we can. So we're going to continue doing that this year. Another way we talked about bringing people together was in building a sense of belonging within our group. And I want to make that a priority this year. Last year we had an election to really animate us, right? There was the midterm election, there was so much work to do, there were so many volunteer opportunities, and there was something to really concentrate our minds and keep us going. This year, there are elections in Virginia and Kentucky and Louisiana, but there's not as much. So we really need to make sure that we have something else to get everybody excited, and I think that building a sense of togetherness and belonging and friendship within our group is really a way to do that. So I encourage you, and I know some of you know everybody and some don't, but please take some time to talk to somebody that you don't know today, especially on the way out here. If you have some time, just chat with somebody, talk about some of the issues that you really care about, what you are getting out of Indivisible, and I think it's great to start conversations like that and really get a sense of belonging. Also, I promise we will have more social focus activities this year. We've done meetups at coffee shops and at bars and at restaurants in the past, and we're going to do more of that this year so that we sometimes just can see each other and do something fun. It doesn't always have to be about politics or something awful. So that's how we're gonna keep the fire burning this year. And finally, we talked about working together across the progressive spectrum, and this is something that I think is actually timely right now. The keynote speaker at our conference was Ezra Levin, who's one of the co-founders of Indivisible. Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg are their husband and wife, and they do some great work. We saw Leah Greenberg last year at the Leader Summit, and this year we got Ezra. So he gave a standard kind of rally the troops speech. He told some funny stories about things that Indivisible has accomplished since they first got started, and it was great hearing from him. But the thing that struck me actually occurred during the Q&A session. Someone submitted a question. They had like question cards, and someone submitted a question, and it was pretty obvious from the wording of the question that it was a little bit snarky, but the question was whether Indivisible welcomes people from across the ideological spectrum, or whether it's just people of a certain ideological bent. And he said pretty emphatically that we welcome everybody. Indivisible is a progressive group, but as Ezra put it, progressive can mean a lot of different things. There are some groups that are kind of mainstream in line with the Democratic Party's ideology. There are some groups that might be a little less to the left, and there's some that are a little more, and that's okay. And even within any given group, there are people of different ideological beliefs. We've got Hillary voters here, we've got Bernie voters here, and that's fine. We're here to work together. We're not here to fight. And while we do promote a lot of the policy ideas that Indivisible, the national group, promotes, like if Indivisible has asked for people to take action on a certain issue, we will go ahead and blast it out on our Facebook group and on our newsletter. That doesn't mean everybody has to do every single action that we ask. If we're asking you to support a policy that you don't support, that's fine. You don't have to. We can all work together on the things that we have in common, and I think that's what makes us strong. We're a group of many different ideologies, and I just want everyone to remember that, and to please keep working together with people, and let's not let our differences hold us apart. The reason I bring this up is because there have been some online discussions where it's clear that not everybody is on the same page on everything, and we don't have to be. But just remember, we're all friends and we're working for a common cause, even if we have slightly different beliefs. Now, I know the presidential election coming up is not going to be just Hillary voters and Bernie voters, right? There's going to be Kamala voters and Bernie voters again, and maybe some Tulsi voters, whatever. There's going to be so many different people supporting different candidates, and honestly, I think it's a good thing. And I think it's great. What's that? And there's going to be, no, there aren't going to be.
Just kidding.
I don't even think they exist, actually. I'd love to say we welcome them, but I don't think there are any.
I'm totally joking.
Let's just do that.
So anyway, staying together, bringing people together, that's what we're here for. And I just hope we can all continue to be friends and do great work together. We have a wonderful guest speaker tonight. He is Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco, and he told us he's going to be about 15 minutes late, so we're going to do some of our announcements beforehand instead of afterward like we usually do. So I'm actually going to segue right into another thing we discussed at the summit, which was California State Strong. Just curious, has anyone heard of California State Strong, or?
Say it again.
How many people have not heard of California State Strong? Okay, a good few of us, so I will explain it. This is a collaboration across California among indivisibles, people who are interested in making some policy successes at the state level. They were formed last year, and although to us here in Sacramento, those of us who work with them, they appear to be a pretty highly professional and intelligent group of people. They confessed to me this weekend that they were brand new and didn't exactly know what they were doing last year. They did a good job of it, honestly. But they kind of formed as a seat of your pants kind of thing, and just decided to get involved and start influencing policy at the state level, which was something that no one in Indivisible had done before. but they actually did a pretty good job of it. And now the model's being copied all around the country. So the woman who was the founder of State Strong, her name is Jiggy Athlingham. She is now the Indivisible Director for State Policy nationwide. So, so obviously they've created a model that we want to replicate. Last year, State Strong found a whole bunch of bills that were being considered at the Capitol and supported them. I think they were supporting something like a couple dozen bills. One thing they've learned this year is that we want to keep our focus a little bit narrower. So they're going to pick one bill that they absolutely love that will be a top priority, and Indivisible's national team is going to throw their support by that. Then there'll be maybe 2 or 3 others that we care about a lot that State Strong will be focusing on. And then there's maybe a handful, 5 or 10 others that we'll just monitor. And that's State Strong. Now, Indivisible Sacramento, we may very well decide that we care about other bills more, and we can certainly devote our energy toward those. But since we are here in Sacramento, it'd be great if we could offer some sort of help and support to Indivisibles across the state. And there are a couple things we can do. First of all, as some of you may know, when legislation is being considered at the Capitol, it gets voted on a lot of times. Before it even gets to the floor for a final vote, it goes through a bunch of committee hearings. And every time there's a committee hearing, people from the public can walk in and comment. You don't have to say much, you just basically say, my name is blank, I'm from blank, and I support this bill, or I oppose this bill. We would really like to get people who are willing to do that. And now we had some last year, and thank you so much to everybody who showed up last year and spoke in favor of legislation. But it'd be great if we could get a team of volunteers who are willing to do that this year. So we have a sign-up sheet. Julie, is that in the back? Anyone who's able to show up during the day at a hearing, just in theory, if you think in theory you might be able to make it to the Capitol on a couple days' notice and show up and sit through a hearing, it would be really great to have you. So and I need to stress, it's really, really easy to do this. You don't have to. So
Yeah.
actually,
Sometimes you go and you say, my name's Haru, I'm from Individual Sacramento, I support this bill. You sit down.
And then after sign something, when you get up.
No, you don't
You
even
don't
sign
sign
it.
anything.
Nope.
Just show up, sit
I know I
down.
went
I'm
at
gonna
one
go ahead and
time.
start passing this around.
Great,
So
yeah.
There's a ledge hearing, you can check that one, and then there's a lobby day. You can check both. One.
So what the lobby day is, check that if you're interested. Indivisible statewide is going to have a lobby day. I think it will be sometime in May. Don't quote me on that. There isn't a date set yet. But it'd be a day that we get a whole group of people to go to the Capitol, and we walk around and knock on doors and just tell them, here's the list of bills that we care about. We hope you can vote for this. And that's mainly a show of support, a show of strength, showing what Indivisible is able to do. The hearings, it may not seem like you're doing much, but the reason that you do that, when you show up at a hearing and say, my name is so-and-so and I support this bill, it gets put in the official legislative record that you're in support of this, so it looks good on paper, and it really helps to show that there is public concern for these bills. Sure.
Do they limit you to what you can say, or?
Yes, and that's why we stress how easy this is, because most of the time when you're at these hearings, they don't want people making lengthy speeches and impassioned defenses of these bills. They just want you to say, my name is such and such and I support this. That's
Like, they'll
And-
kick you out.
yes.
It depends on how many there are. Usually when a group like this is crowded support, you have a whole line of people, and that's when they say, please keep it short. Technically, they're not supposed to limit you.
Oh, okay.
They always do though.
So that is one thing I did not know. Everyone that I've been at, they've always said, just a sentence, and honestly suited me perfectly fine. But okay, that's interesting to know. And speaking of things that we don't know, our State Strong team has offered to put together a training for people who want to learn a little bit more about lobbying state legislators. I was told a date that they could probably make it, but it hasn't been confirmed yet, so I don't want to announce that date. It's within the next month, so I will let you know. And I think it was like a weekday evening, but I'll let you know when I have confirmation of that. So anyone who's interested in showing up at the Capitol and talking, but either you're not sure if it'd be easy to do, or you just want to learn a little bit more about the process, I think this training will be really helpful, and I hope we can get some people to come out. Another thing we can do for supporting state legislation, and again, we're uniquely positioned here in Sacramento. We have a little bit of an advantage that, say, indivisible Los Angeles doesn't have, right? If we want to go to the state capitol and show up, we can just drive there or walk there or whatever and show up. Indivisible in Los Angeles can't do that, but if Indivisible in Los Angeles does show up at the Capitol, it's going to mean a lot to their legislators, because someone just traveled 800 miles to get here. They must really care about this. So what we can do to help with that is we might be able to help out when people from around the state want to come up to Sacramento and speak in support of bills or lobby. And I thought that it'd be great if we could offer them a place to stay. So if, say, a Los Angeles Indivisible group is coming up, they might let us know, hey, we'll be in town 2 weeks from now. And then we would put out a call to anyone who has an extra guest room or an extra couch or something. So if anyone is willing to have a spot or to offer a spot in your house to someone who from another Indivisible group who might be coming up here, could you please note that on the sheet there? Maybe put write something like guest room or lodging or something like that. Yes.
Could you restrict that they not be Dodger or Angel fans?
Well, I use Los Angeles as the example, but we might be getting people from the Bay Area too, so it's possible. So we will make sure that they're not lobbying on baseball-related legislation. That's a good one. It's a good one. No, I think we'd probably get stuck with some Dodger fans, to be honest. A few of them. Oh, that'd be even worse. So the point of all this is that we really want to get involved at the state level. We were last year. We want to continue that this year. And since we're in such a unique position to help, it'd be great. Anything that we could do. So if you can show up at the hearings, please put your name on the list. And if you can offer a room in your house, and again, if you put your name on there, you're not committing to doing this every time. Just in theory, if you have a room that you could potentially offer, then we'll send you an email when we have a need, and if you could do it, just let us know. Okay. So I have spoken for quite a while here, so I'll change things up and we'll get a different voice for a moment. We have actually a preview of our April meeting. We have a representative here from the Citizens Climate Lobby who's just going to give a quick announcement. And so could everyone please welcome Hal Ferber.
You know, this is so similar to our organization, Citizens Climate Lobby. It just makes me smile. Almost everything you're doing is stuff that we do. Well, good evening. My name is Hal Ferber. I belong to an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby. Since our inception 10 years ago, we've been promoting a powerful tool against climate change called carbon fee and dividends. Finally, in the last Congress, bills were introduced in the House and the Senate based on this approach. The House bill has been reintroduced in this Congress. It is H.R. 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and copies of it are on the back table there. We are currently working with several sponsors in the Senate to get the Senate bill reintroduced. So now, very briefly, what is H.R. 763 and how will it work to fight climate change? This bill puts a gradually increasing price on the carbon content of fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas. The fee will start at $15 a ton, and it will increase annually by at least $10 a ton until certain emission targets are finally reached. All of the money collected will be returned to U.S. households with a monthly dividend check. What this will do is it will protect our poorest households up through the middle class from the increased costs that are going to be associated with the carbon fee. There will also be something that's called a border adjustment, which is used to protect the competitiveness of American industry. Essentially what that says is that if you want to trade with the United States, another country, if you want to trade with the United States, and everybody wants to trade with the United States, you will either have a similar way of pricing carbon that we do, or you will pay a carbon fee on the products you seek to import. The carbon fee and dividend approach is also what we call revenue neutral. Because all the money gets returned to U.S. households, the size of government does not grow based on this approach. What this allows, and kind of what I think you guys will be experiencing as you try to move your interesting legislation through, is some bipartisan support for what you're trying to do. In the area of climate, if we're not going to get some bipartisan support, then it means that whatever we try to do is going to take longer, face more resistance, and have less likelihood of being ultimately successful. We project that HR 763 will lead to a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within the first 12 years and a 90% reduction after 20 years. There will also be increases in jobs, about 2.1 million jobs after 10 years, and after about 10 years we'll start to see a $70 to $90 billion growth in GDP. So in other words, most of the time when people talk about climate change solutions, the first thing you hear is, well, it's going to hurt the economy, it's going to hurt jobs. This is an approach that will be good for the economy and it will be good for jobs. Carbon fee and dividend as an approach has been supported for a long time by economists across the political spectrum, whether it's conservatives or liberals. And the call for a price on carbon has existed for a number of years in the scientific community. They have understood for a long time that this is one of the things that has to happen if we're going to successfully fight climate change. So what we're talking about is transforming our economy and the economy of international economies, because we understand that climate change is going to require a global solution. What HR 7063 does is that it sends a price signal to corporations, businesses, and individuals that says you're going to have to be moving away from fossil fuels because they're going to get more expensive. And as they get more expensive and the price of renewables gets lower, the difference will cause us to act in rational ways to move away from fossil fuels. What it will also do, the last thing that it will do, is that it is a message to the investment community that says you've been pouring billions and billions of dollars into coal exploration, into oil exploration, into natural gas exploration and infrastructure. Now, when you see what's happening with these increasing fees, you're much more likely to say, for my energy portfolio, I'm going to be investing in solar farms, I'm going to be investing in wind farms, and most importantly, I'm going to be investing in those technologies that are in the laboratory right now, and I'm going to put money in moving those technologies up through the stages of development so that they become broadly commercial. That's our bill. We're hoping you'll support it. What we do is we lobby. We sent 1,200 people to Congress this past June. We've lobbied every office in the Senate, every office in the House, similar to what you do at the state level. We're hoping you will contact Doris Matsui, Amy Berra, and our 2 senators and say, we support HR 763. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal. And again, we will be having a speaker from the Citizens Climate Lobby talking at our April meeting. Definitely we heard that climate change, global warming is something that we want to hear about. So that's going to be what we're talking about in April. At this point, I'd like to have a couple announcements here. And I know there's some people that have announcements of upcoming events. Julie, did you have one you wanted to talk about?
Yes, as Nate said earlier, Indivisible and Sister District is working together on a postcard study. There's some flyers back there. Our next event is on Saturday, March 2nd. I hate that. Saturday, March 2nd. And it's at the Arden Dimmick Library on Watt Avenue. And it's from 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And so pick up a flyer, and we have about 700 postcards that we need to write. This is the second iteration of the postcards. Many of you joined us on the first iteration of them a few weeks ago, and now we're doing the second batch of postcards that have to be out in April. So thank you very much for your past participation. Hope to see you all there. And on our website, actually, Ellen put on our website, if you go to events, you can actually RSVP on Eventbrite and let us know you're going to be there, so we make sure we have enough tables and chairs for everyone. Okay, thanks.
And I'm sorry, Julie, did you say what state that's going to be for?
Pardon?
Did you say which state that's going to be for, the postcards?
Saturday, March 2nd.
No, I mean,
No.
did we send them to
It's Louisiana.
Louisiana,
It's
okay.
Louisiana, same state.
Okay, thanks. So Louisiana, Kentucky, Virginia, and I think like New Jersey all have odd year elections. So we're gonna do what we can to help them. Yes, Pat, did you
I
have?
have an announcement, yeah.
Great. Do you wanna come up or do you
Yeah,
wanna?
better, I guess.
You have to.
Yeah. So, climate related, 2 different actions that can be taken, that need to be taken. Elk Grove is currently considering a climate action plan. And there's going to be a meeting of the city council on Wednesday, February 27th at 6 o'clock. And our climate action plan is done by many cities as a way to reduce state regulations for some public projects. And so it's a regular process which can have teeth to it, it can have purpose, or it can be something that they do simply to grease the wheels for public projects. In this particular instance, there's a draft of an action plan, and Sacramento 350 is recommending that any of us who are interested write letters to the mayor and to the council people and recommend specific modifications to that. I have 10 different copies of recommended language that you might consider. 10 is not going to be enough for people if you're interested, which I really encourage you to be. So you can go to the Indivisible Sacramento Facebook page, and I posted the same thing there so that you can see that. So writing letters ahead of time and going on the 27th at 6 o'clock to the city council. The second thing, so that's Elk Grove. The second thing is for the city of Sacramento. Let's see. There's a resolution that's being recommended by one of the climate organizations that's already been drafted, and we need volunteers who are residents in each one of the council people's districts to go to the council people with the resolution draft and see who's going to sponsor it. So if you're interested in that, see me before you leave, and I'll take down your name, and we'll see that you're contacted to be a representative. Yes?
Do you know when it would be?
It's in the draft stage, and so we don't have a specific date, but whoever is willing to go and see the representative will determine a time that's mutually possible for you. What's that?
Sorry, just.
I'm done.
Great, thanks, Beth. And actually, our guest is here.
Okay.
So without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker tonight. He is a state senator representing San Francisco, and he has been a friend of our group who has sponsored some of the most important legislation that we supported last year, including SB 822, the net neutrality bill, which passed and was signed into law by Governor Brown last year. So please welcome Senator Scott Wiener.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I guess it's been a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for your work, and it's really great whenever, and this is true last year too, that so many people are engaged. I know, of course, Indivisible and so much activism rose up after the 2016 election. It's almost embarrassing that I was elected the same night that Donald Trump was elected. I didn't know what to do or what to feel that night. It was a lot of conflicting emotions. But it's great that so much of the energy that came as a result of that terrible election result continues. So thank you for continuing to fight the fight as we take our country back. So I just mentioned a few things that we're working on this year, and it is I think going to be a really big year in the legislature. And even though I didn't agree with Governor Brown and everything, he was he really was a terrific governor in a lot of ways, and helped stabilize the state financially, and we were able to do a lot of great housing work and criminal justice reform and other important efforts under the governor. But Governor Newsom now is hitting the ground running and working very, very collaboratively with the legislature. And as I know you've seen, he's really already announced some just terrific progressive efforts, including significant expansion of early childhood education, trying to really investing more in homelessness, which is such a statewide problem, and of course just pushing back when the other coast pushes the wrong way. So I'm really excited about what we're going to get done working with the governor. And of course this year some of the I think priorities or some of the focuses in the legislature will be, of course, the wildfires, which it's hard to even get your head around it. If you haven't been experienced one of those fires, which I have not, thankfully. Just that level of devastation, and wondering if it's going to be every year, which it may be, and recommitting ourselves to the fight against climate change, which we can't do alone in California, but we can really help lead. And so we're continuing to push to move towards 100% clean energy, and take all the other steps that we need to try to do our part and to try to send a signal for the whole world that it can be done, and including working with other countries, as we've been doing, even with the withdrawal from the Paris Accord. But also just taking steps that we need to be better prepared for these fires, to make sure whether it's building codes, whether it's having good defenses around people's homes, making sure that our emergency response is where it needs to be, beefing up CAL FIRE, which has done an enormous amount of amazing work with inadequate resources. This is going to be a big, big focus. We're also, I think, going to have a big year again on housing. We did in 2017, and I think we're going to see it again. The governor in his budget has already put down a number of important markers, including a significant increase in funding support for cities to build affordable housing, as increasing the state's low-income housing tax credit, providing cash, I don't know if you want to call them incentives, bonuses for cities that are doing the right thing around housing, and then also a bill that I'm authoring, Senate Bill 50, to address one of the foundational challenges we have with housing in California, which is overly restrictive zoning. Zoning is a fancy way of saying banning all types of housing except for usually one type, sometimes single-family homes, that it's illegal to build anything other than that. 75% of the landmass of California, of the residential landmass, is zoned only for single-family homes. It's illegal to build even a 3 or 4 unit building. That makes it illegal to build affordable housing, which is only multi-unit. You can't build senior housing, you can't build anything other than single-family. And I grew up in a single-family home, so nothing against single-family homes, but we know that we have a 3.5 million home deficit in California. That's how many homes we're short, which is equal to the housing deficit of the other 49 states combined. And because in many of our job centers and transit accessible areas, we're so restrictive with not allowing much housing, we end up building further and further and further out. And so we cover up all the farmland, we build in wildfire zones, and people are pushed into what we call the super commuters, who are driving an hour and a half, 2 hours each way to work every day, clogging up the freeways, undermining our climate goals. And so the bill will set stronger standards for areas, particularly near public transportation and with good jobs access, to say we need to allow more housing in those areas. It's a controversial bill because we've traditionally in California said local communities can do whatever they want on housing. We've either had no standards or toothless standards. Contrast that with public education, something also very important, where we can debate what the state standards should be, but the state sets standards. You have to educate children at least a certain number of days per year. You have to use credentialed teachers. There are certain subjects you have to teach, and so forth. We would never let school districts just have complete blank canvas on what a basic public education is in California. So we're going to keep working on that bill and the funding bills, and there are a number of bills to increase tenant protections in California. We have, as you know, not just in Sacramento or San Francisco, but throughout the state, a significant portion of our population are renters, and overwhelmingly in California they have little or no protection from evictions, from explosive rent increases, and so there will be bills this year to, I think, to reform Costa-Hawkins. I'm co-authoring or joint authoring a bill to protect Section 8 voucher holders from discrimination. Right now, landlords don't have to rent to Section 8, and that's not true in most states. Most states say you can't discriminate, so we have a bill to try to end that discrimination here. And we have a legislation to try to increase resources for people to access counsel if they're facing eviction. And then there are some very, very, very controversial bills, statewide just cause bill and a statewide rent cap. Those will be big, big fights. But whatever happens with individual bills, I think there's growing awareness that we have to do more to protect renters. We're also going to see, I think we have a renewed focus on shoring up our infrastructure in California. We've passed a number of measures in the last few years to increase the funding because we've allowed our infrastructure to deteriorate. And we're going to continue to try to reverse that. A few bills that I'm authoring that I think Indivisible had asked me to mention. We're doing a few bills to continue in our push to reform California's broken criminal justice system, a system that over-incarcerates, under-rehabilitates, and does not do well in terms of avoiding recidivism. And so we have a bill, SB, and it's early in the term, so I'm going to mess up numbers probably. SB 136, I believe it is, which will eliminate one of the most common sentencing enhancements in California. If you are convicted of 2 felonies, no matter when, this is not as extreme as 3 strikes, but 2 felony convictions, even if they're like 30, 40 years apart, and even if they're not violent, there's an automatic 1-year enhancement. It doesn't sound like a lot, but a significant percentage of our prison population in California has that enhancement. Every year someone spends in jail is about $80,000. So we have tens of thousands of people with this enhancement. So it is a significant amount of money, not accomplishing much of anything. And again, this is not about people who are violent offenders. It applies to non-violent too. So the bill will eliminate that enhancement. We also have a bill, and one of the things about representing San Francisco, as my predecessor Mark Leno said to me as we were handing off the baton, he said when you represent San Francisco, you have a latitude to push the envelope and to do things that that other members may not be able to do politically, and indeed your constituents demand that you push the envelope. And so there's certain subject areas where very few members can actually do it, but the work has to be done. And one is fixing our broken sex offender registry. 2 years ago, I authored legislation, and we had law enforcement support for it to end California's terrible practice of saying every registered sex offender is on for the rest of their life, whether they were a sexually violent predator or whether they were arrested for indecent exposure for having sex in the park in 1965. Rest of your life on the registry. We have 1 in 400 Californians is on the sex offender registry, and it's so big and bloated that it's useless to law enforcement, because if someone, let's say a child gets abducted, and you say let's pull up all the sex offenders within 20 miles, and 700 names come up, law enforcement can't use it. And so the bill that we passed 2 years ago made it a tiered registry, and we were one of only 4 states, by the way, in the country that required lifetime registration for everyone. So we tiered it to say the real extreme people, the predators, people engaging, you know, in rape, people doing really just the worst of the crimes are on for life, and then other people after either 20 years or 10 years, if they have a totally clean record, they can petition the court to get off the registry, and the DA can oppose it or not oppose it. So we tried to create more flexibility, and we passed that bill with law enforcement support. This year I'm authoring a bill, SB 145, which will end some discrimination in the sex offender registry, where LGBT young people get put onto the registry, whereas straight young people engaging in the same sexual behavior don't. And it's basically what we call the Romeo and Juliet situation, where you have someone who's a little bit over 18, someone who's under 18, 15, 16, 17, and they have consensual sex. If it is what we will call traditionally straight sex, vaginal sex, you don't have to go on the registry. The judge can keep you off or keep you on depending on the facts. If it's any other kind of sex, you have to go onto the sex offender registry. And so that means that, you know, a gay 19-year-old kid having sex with his 17-year-old boyfriend has to go on the registry, whereas if it's an opposite sex couple, the judge can decide not to let them on. So we want to end that discrimination. We also, yesterday, I introduced a major solar energy and clean energy bill, SB 288, a bipartisan effort to try to eliminate some of the major barriers to people putting solar and storage and other renewable energy on their homes, businesses, schools, nonprofits, farms. Right now, the utilities have a whole slew of barriers, ways of making it hard and expensive for people to interconnect when they have these clean energy solar panels or whatever on their property. It can take months or even years to be able to get through the process. And then once people are on the grid, the tariff for what compensation you get when you produce more than you need and it goes back in is outdated, and there are a whole bunch of technologies where you get no compensation. So we know that we need more decentralized energy generation in California. We need diversity in our energy system, and we don't just need endless construction of new transmission wires, which is very expensive, creates wildfire risk. So we want to make it easier for people to generate their own clean energy. And so this is sort of a solar bill of rights in essence. And then we're also doing several anti-poverty bills. One is a bill to essentially eliminate the asset test for people who are on CalWORK. Right now, if you are low income and you're receiving CalWORKs benefits, you have an asset test. So if you have certain assets, you know, obviously if someone, you have $100,000 in the bank, it's one thing. But cars are part of the asset test. So if you are working poor, or you need to get to school or get your kids to school and so you need a car, that can disqualify you from receiving CalWORks benefits. And so you force people to choose between, do you get your cash grant to be able to survive, or do you have your car to get to school or get your kids to school or a doctor's appointment. And so the bill will exclude cars from the asset test. And then we're working to try to increase uptake on CalFresh, formerly known as food stamps. California has one of the lowest uptakes for people who are eligible for CalFresh. And part of the problem is that instead of having one centralized state system, we have county by county. So if people move between counties, they have to reapply, and we have a lot of unnecessary barriers. So we have a bill to try to set enforceable goals for counties to increase the percentage of eligible people who can access CalFresh. When we have such a low uptake, we leave federal money on the table because CalFresh is mostly funded by the federal government. And we know that we have so many people in California who struggle with food. A lot of people who are working, but they're working poor, and they're raising families, and they really struggle to put food on the table, so we need to change that. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, and yes, one last thing, an update on net neutrality. Thank you for the support on SB 822 and Indivisible. I know you were Indivisible Sacramento people who came to every single hearing on that bill, so thank you. So the bill, the governor signed it on the last day that he was able to. It was a Sunday at 5 o'clock he signed it.
Yeah.
And 30 minutes later, Jeff Sessions ran into court and filed a lawsuit. Actually, that night, because Nancy Pelosi had been really, really helpful with that bill, and as soon as she called me, she said, "Doesn't he have anything better to do on a Sunday night?" So he filed that lawsuit, and then a few days later, AT&T and the other telecom and cable companies filed their lawsuit. The lawsuit's on hold, and the law is on hold because really everything is the major appeal pending in the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, D.C., which is the appeal of the FCC's action repealing net neutrality. And part of that appeal is whether the FCC has the power to preempt states from acting, because the FCC, when it repealed, it put in a provision saying states can't now adopt this, and we think that's illegal, that they don't have that power. But the federal court in DC will make that ruling. If the federal court rules that that preemption is valid, then we have a real challenge on our hands. But hopefully we'll win that argument, and then our lawsuit here can proceed. So it's in limbo now, and hopefully it'll get resolved favorably and quickly. So questions? Yes?
Any legislation on homeless at all?
Yes, quite a bit. As I mentioned, the governor put quite a bit of funding, substantial funding, in his proposed budget for a number of needs for emergency shelter. I think it's $500 million to help local communities with have enough shelter, and then funding for supportive housing. So it's a very positive budget. Last year in the Senate, we made a play to try to get $1.2 billion in new funding for homelessness, and we negotiated with the governor and got about half of that. I have a bill, SB 48, to try to improve access to shelters in California. Shelters, of course, are not the goal. The goal is permanent housing. But with that said, we have well over 100,000 people on the streets in California every night, and so shelter is an important transition. And we want to make sure, first of all, that people can get shelter, because there are entire counties in California with 0 shelter beds, or shelter beds that are only open in the winter, or very few shelter beds, or shelter beds that are 75 miles away. And so we need more equitable geographic access. There's also, we need some clear standards on shelters. There are shelters in California with no running water, shelters where you can't bring your pet, so people don't want to have to choose, do I want to stay with my pet, or do I want to be in a shelter? And it's too hard to actually build shelters. so we're trying to tackle those issues as well. So there's quite a bit happening on homelessness this year. Yep.
Just to add to that before I ask my question, I think another problem is that there are very few places that have shelters for families.
Yes.
They need to
Or for youth. 2/3 of California counties do not have youth-specific homeless services, period.
It's dangerous. And I had a question about the sex offender registry, because I think, I don't know if it's still the case, but I had understood that those who are registered are also really limited in where they're allowed to live. And usually it places them far away from any services they need. And
Yeah.
if they're having any change in that mindset.
Yeah, so not only does California have, and listen, this is a hard issue, right? We're talking about, because there are up to the spectrum of what we consider sex offenders, and there are sex offenders who really do terrible things and damage people's lives, and so it's
I'm
not
talking about those people.
right. But I just want to, I always like to just acknowledge that. Yes, so we were one of 4 states where it was lifetime, and we have restrictions on where people can live. And there was actually one restriction that was struck down. The voters passed Prop, I want to say 83, about 10, 12, 13 years ago, that was so restrictive in terms of anywhere within a certain distance of parks, schools, other things, that the entire city of San Francisco was off limits, and I suspect that Sacramento was probably largely off limits as well. And yes, what you do is when you drive sex offenders, into homelessness. So they don't have access to services. You make them homeless because you make it impossible for them to live anywhere, for them to get a job anywhere. And then if they are homeless and jobless, they are more likely to recidivate. And so that is the opposite of what you need to do. But it's a really, when we did this bill, we were able to get it passed because we had law enforcement support, and we had broad support for the bill. California Alliance Against Sexual Assault, which is the main, basically the Women Against Rape, like the rape centers, their coalition called CASA, Coalition Against Sexual Assault, was one of our sponsors because they knew that the registry is useless when it has so many people in it. But when I was on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, San Francisco, we're a city and a county, so it was essentially city council. There was a proposal, a group which is like one of the most respected groups in terms of they provide rehabilitation services for sex offenders. They're like this glowing reputation. They do great work. They don't work with predators. They work with sort of the mid-level sex offenders, and they're very successful. And they were losing their lease, so they wanted to move into a area in my old supervisor district, and my old district was a very lefty progressive district, and they wanted to move into the most lefty part of a lefty district. And you would have thought that they were proposing to drop a bomb on the neighborhood. It was, people came out and we had a community meeting. It was the most intense community meeting I ever presided over as an elected official, and people who I knew were really, really progressive people. But people just, they assume that these people are going to come in and they're going to get our children. Even though if you go on the sex offender registry, you can see that they're living all around. People get really, and again, I get it, because people jump to the worst assumptions. But I think we've been able to make some successful strides in addressing some of those issues and ensuring that people don't have their lives destroyed on the registry such that they end up committing crimes again.
The bankruptcy of PG&E, are they going to be abating responsibility? I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, this last year when we were dealing with the aftermath of the 2017 fires, there were some people who were saying, "Oh, who cares if PG&E goes into bankruptcy? They deserve it." And I kept saying, "No, we don't want them in bankruptcy because that'll make it harder for the victims of the wildfires." But they are in bankruptcy, of course. It is not good for the wildfire victims. I don't think automatically that it's going to go to pennies on the dollars. I think there are things that can happen in bankruptcy, there's a lot of risk for these victims now. I don't know what's going to happen in the bankruptcy proceeding, and there are people who would like to break up PG&E or move to a public power model, but we have limited control over that. I know the state is going to make every effort to participate in the bankruptcy proceeding, but I think it's too early now to know exactly what's going to happen. We're all very mindful of ensuring that these victims are made whole to the extent possible.
I have a question about the petition for a person who wants to get off of the sex offender
Yeah.
registry. Is that through the civil courts? And if so, do they pay the normal filing fees? Because those are in hundreds of dollars. And
Yeah.
as has been stated, if you're basically without a job,
Yeah.
without a place to live, you don't have those hundreds of dollars.
So we had to give under normal circumstances, the bill would have taken effect a year ago, last January 1st, 2018. The Attorney General, and in fairness, there's 120,000 people on the registry, and a whole bunch are going to be able to come off. And so the database goes back to when the registry was created in 1947. So it's a little messy, and so they needed a few years to get ready. So it goes into effect. It's January 1st, 2021. So it's another less than 2 years, and so people will be able to apply to the Attorney General. And it's been a year since I've thought about this, but I can't remember if you can do that in 2020 or 2021. Or the Attorney General will notify you, or you can seek notification of what your tier is, and then we made it so that they could clear off a lot of people at the beginning. People do have the option of going into court to get taken off, and usually if you're low income, you can seek a waiver of your fees. But double check me on all of that, because it's been almost a year and a half since I've really thought about the process. We made some changes at the end. There were some concerns about automatically clearing certain people off, so we made it a little bit more of a structured process, but I'm forgetting the details now.
From a public health perspective, we've seen an outbreak of measles in Washington State,
Yep.
possibly some in Oregon. Are we doing any preemptive work to close loopholes where parents are getting excuses not to immunize their kids? And the other is,
yes.
are we also leveraging the statewide childhood immunization registry to track compliance?
Yeah, so I'm very, very concerned with what's happening. I'm very concerned with, I very much am very supportive of Dr. Pan's work in this area. That bill passed before I was in the legislature, but I supported it. And I do think we have to look at the loopholes that we're seeing, and the physicians who are granting sort of unwarranted medical exemptions. People have a right to their opinion on the vaccine issue, but I think the public health question is pretty clear, and these kids need to be vaccinated. And I don't know if Dr. Pan will be introducing new legislation. I know he and I have spoken. He's, I know, deeply concerned about what's happening. So I don't want to speak for him, and he's very much a leader on the issue, but I support his efforts. So I think that loophole does need to be closed.
Yeah, and I had heard that some doctors are actually selling excuses. They're posting on the website, whether that if a parent needs an excuse, go see them, and they actually pay more. The parents pay out of pocket to get an excuse.
Yeah, I've heard that too, and it's very troubling and not ethical. So.
I have sort of two questions. Because I've been watching a lot about this Jeff Bezos and the Amazon thing in New York, they've mentioned a couple times on at least MSNBC that they don't pay taxes.
I saw that the other day that their federal taxes were 0 or close to it. I don't know why that is. What I do know is that when they did the tax mess law and reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Normally, when you do, if you want to do like tax simplification, tax reform, and if you want to lower the rate, you accompany it with closing loopholes and deductions, and so you make it a more simple thing. And sometimes you can do that and make it revenue neutral. But apparently, they not only reduced the tax rate by 40%, but they did not close the loopholes. And so it wouldn't be surprising to me to have major corporations pay a little or no taxes. I think it's outrageous, and I know, hopefully one day we'll control
Well, that's
both
what I was
branches
gonna
again
ask
and be
you,
able to deal with it.
because it seems like, at least what I've read, there is significantly contributing to gentrification in places like San Francisco and in the Silicon Valley and stuff like that. Do they have any financial social responsibility for example, providing housing for low-income people since they displaced them? And, is there any way that they can be held accountable not socially, I guess, financially, to do some kind of payback? Because it seems like they're walking out the door with, I mean, if you get a divorce and your wife gets $78 billion, maybe you could be doing something a little bit more.
Well, Amazon doesn't have much of a presence in San Francisco, has a small presence, probably a little bit more in Silicon Valley. In San Francisco, we have other employers who are much bigger. My putting Amazon aside, but just in general, my view is that when employers create jobs, a lot of jobs, that's usually something that cities want. We want good employment. In terms of the housing, because we've gone through, and I was on the board of supervisors from 2011, 2016, like during the heartland of our just explosion of rents going up, and also going from over 10% unemployment, which was bad, to under 3% unemployment, and from a $500 million deficit in our city budget to a surplus. So in a way, like on the one hand, coming in 2011, when huge unemployment, huge budget deficits, we were slashing safety net services. It was terrible. My first year in the budget, we had to cut a lot, and it's horrible. And then all of a sudden, you have lots of jobs. You have we completely rebuilt, what we had to cut, and went beyond that, huge amounts of money into affordable housing and other needs. So it was great, and people were back to work. But the housing costs just exploded. And I personally, I don't blame the employers for doing that. The employers they're setting up their businesses and growing. Housing, to me, is a communal responsibility that we all have to sort of look at ourselves in the mirror and look at what housing policies have we put in place, understanding that growth is going to happen. You can't always predict it, but it will happen. And were we ready for it with our transportation infrastructure, with our housing policies? And I think we weren't. And one of the examples of that, and so in the Bay Area, some of our biggest employers are like Facebook and Google. Well, Facebook and Google, for years, were trying to build housing for their employees down in Mountain View and Menlo Park. And they were not allowed to do it, because if you're a company, you don't control land use, you don't approve projects, you don't control zoning. And so when Mountain View for many years would not allow Google to build any of the housing they wanted to build, Google was not, there's nothing they could do about it. It's now starting to change. And we also are, it's about paying taxes. Because ultimately, if it's a prosperous company employing a lot of people, that's great. It's a good thing. We want to make sure they're paying their fair share of taxes. And with this tax cut that happened, they're not.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to change.
I guess that was my question.
Yeah, that's what needs to change.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions.
I don't want to choose. Okay, why don't these last three? We'll do.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I understand that Senator McGuire is renewing the Presidential Tax Transparency
Yeah.
Act. Are you co-sponsoring
I'm a
that?
joint author of that. Yeah.
Joint author.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
And do you remember the number what it is this time? It's okay. I'll
I'm
look it
sorry,
up.
I don't.
That's okay.
I should have brought a list with me.
That's okay. I'll look it up and we'll post about it. What
is it called?
The Presidential Tax Transparency Act was SB 149 back in the day, whatever that was.
Yeah, 2017, and the Governor Brown vetoed it.
Yeah. Do you feel like some of the issues that, can you talk about some of the issues that were challenging?
Well, we got it pretty easily to I think every Democrat voted for it in the legislature. And Governor Brown, in his veto message, I think he thought that it was unconstitutional, which I don't agree with. And also, you know, I can't remember if he mentioned if it sets a precedent for other, I don't know. But we're hoping that Governor Newsom will, you know, be more receptive to it. But I don't know if he will be. I just don't know. It's one of those issues. I think once you get it on the governor's desk, you don't know what their thought process is going to be. But I think we have a good shot at getting it back there.
So you mentioned kind of tangentially about tax reform, and I know that Governor Newsom has talked about redoing the tax structure for California, which is something I'm kind of interested in, because I think we have a very lopsided, you know, tax structure, in that, you know, much of our tax structure, I do want wealthy people to pay what's fair, but I also think it's, you know, set up so that it's not, more of our money should be for services. We're taxing on services. It's less. It's because it's purchasing goods, and the disproportionate money is in services, and talking about flat to get out, all that. So anyways, I was curious what your thoughts are on that.
California's tax structure is really problematic, and so we are, because of Prop 13, we are very reliant on income taxes on high earners and capital gains, which I'm all for income taxes on high earners and capital gains taxes, but that is the most volatile form of taxation, and that's why, you know, when you talk about California's boom bust budget, when we go for these huge surpluses and these huge tens of billions of dollar deficits, it's not stable, and so I'm a supporter, for example, of split roll, taking commercial property out of Prop 13. The other piece of it, what you mentioned about our sales tax is antiquated in a way, because sales tax was created when we were primarily a goods-driven economy, and so we don't tax services with sales tax, but our economy is increasingly service-oriented, and so there's been Senator Hertzberg from LA has a proposal to include services and sales tax and then lower the sales tax, so it's generating the same amount of money, but it's more spread out. That is a huge fight. When you're taking a whole, and all the industries, the tax preparers and the massage therapist, everyone comes out.
Hairdressers,
yes, everyone.
Everybody.
And it's really hard. The other thing is that Prop 13 is very anti-housing, because when you say we're going to cap property taxes, but cities can collect sales tax and business tax, it is much more lucrative for cities to favor commercial development over residential development. And if split roll passes, I support it, it's going to be great for public education. It's going to be problematic for housing, because now if you do commercial, you get sales tax, business tax, and uncapped property tax. If you do residential, you get capped property tax and nothing else. So cities end up spending most of their budget on residents, whereas home housing pays very little, or not, a minority in many cities of the tax revenue. And so it exacerbates our housing crisis, because cities don't want to build housing, not just because some people are anti-development, but because they look at their budget and say, this is not working for us. And so in order to fix that, actually Darrell Steinberg, when he was in the Senate, had a bill to require regional sales tax sharing, so that you remove some of that disincentive. And it's there's a good policy argument to do that. You can imagine, didn't go over so well. Cities, you know, and I'm sympathetic because cities struggle with their budgets. And they say, wait, I can't even do my sales tax anymore. I have to pool it with the other cities. So it's a hard one. And we need to reform our tax structure, but that is arguably the hardest thing to do. Yeah.
So I was surprised when New York City turned down Amazon because of the tax waivers that we were going to have. Do you think that California City will see that as a lead? New York leading California?
So you know, tax incentives for businesses, I think, are generally not a good thing in terms of I think they're, you know, in San Francisco, and we got criticized for it during the recession. We created a zone in the mid-market area with a 5-year tax holiday in order to draw businesses into that area. It was a very depressed area of San Francisco for decades. No one could figure out what to do. So we had this very discrete geographic area where we say 5 years you don't pay payroll tax, and then you have to do community benefits, and then after 5 years you pay it. And so a bunch of businesses did go into that area, and it's completely revolutionized the area. One of those businesses was Twitter, and so we got beat up for the Twitter tax break, even though what people forget is Twitter, I'm confident, would have just gone somewhere else in San Francisco. So I supported that, as did most of the board of supervisors, and I think it was the right thing to do during a terrible recession. I think having broad, you know, like what they were offering Amazon seemed that it was not that. It was a huge amount of money, and I don't know that they needed to do that. I could see some states that are not considered as attractive for business needing to do that to jumpstart things, and I get that. I don't know that New York City needed to do that. In talking to people I know there, I think it got portrayed in the news that like everyone was against Amazon. I don't think that was the case. And I know a lot of the small businesses around there were very much in favor of it, the mom and pops, because it's just going to bring a ton of sort of foot traffic to their businesses. So we'll see what happens. They're going to go somewhere, but I think it did send a message about excessive tax incentives. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's our meeting for today. Unless anyone else has any announcements or questions or anything they'd like to bring up. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you same day in March 20th.